בבקשה, אנחנו שמחים לשמוע כל דבר מה שתספר לנו.
Well, I will speak in English. My father was the Rosh HaKohal of the Masich Hadat Kehillah, and I therefore was present when Harav Kook arrived here in England in the late 1915. That's Tafresh Ayin Vav. He had been in Europe and was stranded there when the First World War began in August 1914, and he went to Switzerland. And my father invited him to come to London to act as Rav of the Masiki Hadass.
From St. Gallen, yes? From St. Gallen,
I don't remember which town he lived in there. His son was studying at a yeshiva at St. Gallen. But I only remember that Harav Kook was invited by my father to come, and he came, as I said, at the end of 1915, and he stayed here till almost the summer of 1919, and that was about towards the end of Tafresh Ayin Tet. Well, my father was a Yelid Yerushalayim of the Mishpacha of Zalaznik, but there were various reasons for Shinu Shem, and my name has become Choma. Choma Chet Vav Mem He. Harav Kook arrived here in London and was very well received by the whole community, the Orthodox community, and especially by the Rabbanim who were already here, and he was a very fine man. He was very kind to everybody. He never thought evil of anybody. He tried to establish an organization called Degel Yerushalayim, because at that time there were lots of arguments as between the Aguda and the Mizrahi, but unfortunately his efforts for the Degel Yerushalayim did not succeed, and he gave that up. I remember him very well indeed, because my father being the Rosh HaKahal, I was almost a Ben Bayit in his house, and I went there frequently. And I remember on one occasion, because the custom of the community here was that people came along to his house to ask she'elot about various things, and once when I came, there was a woman there who had come with a chicken because she wanted to know whether it was kasher or trefa. And he spent a long time discussing or looking up what was the trouble. And I remember he took one sefer from the shelf and then another, and he kept on a long time. In the end, the chicken was kasher and everything was all right. The Harav Kook was, of course, very active in many spheres. At that time, people were being called up for military service, but anybody who was training for the ministry to become a Rav or a minister was exempt from military service, and he gave to any yeshiva bachur who came to him, he gave him a certificate that he was training to become a Rav, and so a lot of young men were exempted from military service because of his kindness. He also had many contacts with the Zionist leaders, and I'm sure that a lot of behind-the-scenes activity went on, and he played no small part in the eventual Balfour Declaration, which was issued in November 1917. At the beginning of 1919, that's in Tafresh Ayin Vav, a very famous Rav in Eastern Europe died. His name was Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, known as Reb Chaim Brisker. And Harav Kook gave a hesped for him in the Machziki Hadash Shul. I was present, and I remember very well the occasion, because at one stage during his hesped, he asked the whole congregation, and the shul was full, he asked everyone to sit on the floor for a full minute, which he also did when he was standing up in front of the Aron Kodesh, and they all sat down. It was a very moving spectacle. I was very much impressed by it at the time.
דוקטור חומה, אני רואה פה את התמונה הזאת, תמונה מאוד ידועה, מאוד מוכרת בארץ, ואני רואה שאתה מחזיק אותה. יש איזו סיבה שהתמונה הזאת, דווקא התמונה הזאת נמצאת בידך? יש לזה סיבה מיוחדת?
Yes, it is something very interesting.
Can we see the picture?
picture?
Yeah. Okay.
Harav Kook was acting as Sandik at a Brit Milah in my mishpacha, and he was sitting in this chair waiting for the mohel to come. The mohel was late, and he sat there for a long time absolutely motionless, didn't flicker an eyelid. And I had my camera with me, and at that time there were no flashlights, but I erected my camera onto a tripod and took an indoor exposure of 4 seconds. He didn't move one bit, and the photograph turned out a success. It was only a small photograph, and this was the picture I took, and you may see that he's sitting in front of a table which is laid ready for the Seudah after the Milah.
This is the original.
That is the original picture which I took. I was then very active in a Jewish youth movement called the Sinai, Chevra Sinai, which had been founded by Rabbi Dr. Meir Tzvi Jung, who was the Rav of the Federation of Synagogues. He founded this movement, and I was active in that movement, and we needed money, so I thought if I could get that picture enlarged and sell it for this Chevra Sinai, that it would be helpful. And I didn't dare to ask Harav Kook whether I could do it, whether I could use that photograph, and I asked my father to ask him. My father made the inquiry of him, and Harav Kook had no idea that he had been photographed at all. And when my father asked him, he was surprised, but he immediately said it. He said it's a case of gonev nefesh umacharov. But he gave his consent, he allowed it, and not only that, he gave me his chetima, his autograph at the bottom, which is dated Or Leyom Leyud Bet Menachem Av Ateret, London.
Ateret is Tafresh Ayin Tet.
Tafresh Ayin Tet, yeah. He gave me the permission to have this photograph enlarged, and this photograph was enlarged by a very famous firm which doesn't exist anymore. It was known as Rafel Tuck. They were known all over as producing picture postcards and things all over, but it was a Jewish firm. The founder of the firm was Adolf Tuck, and they've named a hall after him. But he was the head of this. He had died, but one of his children agreed to do it, and they made this photograph without charging me 1 penny. They enlarged it, they made a slight alteration to take away the matters on the table, and that is the picture, which is a very beautiful picture.
באיזה שנה זה היה? באיזה שנה?
They did this soon after. Now, one other incident which I remember very well was after Harav Kook had left England, and he became, of course, Rav Rashi first in Yerushalayim, and then Rav Rashi in Eretz Yisrael. And then about 5 years later, he visited America, and on his way back, and this is in 1924, Tafresh Pei Dalet, he passed through London, and there was a reception for him held by the Mizrahi organization. And the chief rabbi, Dr. Hertz, was the Yoshev Rosh, and he introduced Harav Kook in these words: Abraham, Yitzchak, הכהן, Kook, Gadol Meraban Shemor. And that was the whole introduction, and it was a very pleasant evening.
הוא לא היה שם?
I was present, yes.
אני שמעתי ממך אולי פעם שהכרת גם את הבן של הרב אברהם יצחק הכהן קוק זצ"ל, שמרן הרב זצ"ל, הבן שלו הרב ציודה קוק, הוא היה גם כן בלונדון? פגשת אותו בלונדון?
Yes, I met, he arrived in London, I think it was soon after the war in 1918, and I met him. I actually took a photograph of him. I can't find it anymore, but he was a young man then. I think he must have been nearly 30 years old, or between 20 and 30. He was a nice young man, and I took his picture, and that was that. The Harav Tzvi Yehuda Cook, in recent years, that means something like about 10 years ago, in Eretz Israel, and I visited his home, and I told him the whole story about the photograph. I don't know whether he misunderstood me or what happened, but somebody who wrote a book called Or Mufla about Harav Cook told the story about this photograph and said that I had published this photograph for my own benefit, and I was very annoyed about it, and I wrote to Harav Tzvi Yehuda Cook about it, and this Rav eventually published an advertisement in a newspaper in Tel Aviv, not Hatzofer, in another paper in Tel Aviv, and he apologized about it. So I think it must have been a misunderstanding.
But now we have the picture,
Yeah.
everybody enjoy it.
Yes, I know. I've seen the picture published in many books. I have one here where it's published.
חזון הרב קוק ומגשימיו. כן.
Can we see that?
כן, זה הספר, חזון הרב קוק ומגשימיו, הדור הצעיר הדתי הלאומי. וכאן בדיוק התמונה הזאת שראינו מקודם.
So the photograph I took of Harav Cook has now become well known.
כמה דברים, אולי תספר קצת על עצמך. ברוך השם, זכית לראות את יהדות אנגליה מתקופת הרב עד היום. מה היו התפקידים שלך בקהילה? מה היה באותה תקופה? למדת שהכרת את הרב קוק, או כבר עבדת בתור רופא כשהרב קוק היה פה?
When Harav Cook was here, I was beginning my medical studies, and eventually I qualified as a doctor in 1922, and I've been in medical practice ever since. But even though I've been a practicing doctor, I've been very much occupied in the work of the Kehillah. First of all, I worked a lot with the Adat Yisrael Kehillah and helped to establish them. That was in the 1920s up to 1938. And then later, when my father died, I became active in the Kehillah Machziki Adat, and I'm still officially the president, the Yoshev Rosh of the Machziki Adat Kehillah.
יש היום בית כנסת בשם מחזיקי הדת.
כן.
לא רחוק, נכון? לא רחוק.
לא רחוק, yes. There's a new, we built the shul in the East End was no longer useful because most of the Orthodox Jews had moved away from the East End as a result of the bombing in the war, and they live now outside at the East End. And we have built another shul in this district. Apart from the Kehillah matters, I was also very interested in many other things. I was a member of the London County Council for 21 years, and I have also been, in the Kehillah matters, the chairman of the Shechita Committee of the Board of Deputies, and I did a lot of work in defense of Shechita in the House of Parliament. I also have been the president of the Chevrat Hachnasat Brit, the Initiation Society for training Mohalim and so on.
זה קיים גם היום? היום גם יש?
I resigned last year after being president for 43 years. And so I think I have done my share of communal activity.
עכשיו עד 120 תזכה להמשיך? להוציא זיכרונות? אתה עובד על הזיכרונות שלך עכשיו?
Yeah, I'm still trying to write my memoirs.
ותזכיר גם את הרב קוק בזיכרונות?
Of course I will. I've mentioned a whole lot of many of the things which I've mentioned here this evening. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, I hope within 4 weeks' time, I shall be Ben Tishim.
עד 120. עד 120.
120. In 4 years.
כ"ג שבט.
כ"ג שבט. כ"ג שבט. ט"ו בשבט זה עוד ינובון בשיבה.
כן.
נובה.
כן.